Grüß und willkommen in einem Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 33, my organisational series of videos. In this video I'll attempt to provide an overview of the comparative strengths of PRC and ROC military formations. To complement my ROC and PRC Armed Forces videos, the previous two videos, let's now look at the component formations and attempt to determine some form of combat strengths for each of them. This will allow us to predict any conflict, or what kind of conflict would occur, and what the results would be between these formations. In my previous videos, I feel that if the US became involved in any conflict, the PRC will be unable to land sufficient military forces on Taiwanese land in order to guarantee victory, and will most likely suffer a humiliating defeat. I must point out this will not always be the case. The strengths of the forces the PRC could land have increased at least 50% since 2014. If it increases an additional 50% in the following 8 to 10 years, then this assumption will no longer be the case. Unless the ROC beefs up its military, or if the US deploys troops on Taiwan, I can see in the future the PRC will probably be able to win any conflict. Now, this assumption is based on the gut feel that opposing brigades will be of similar strength. However, this was really a gut feel guess. Let's try and determine if my gut feel guess is correct or if it's totally wrong. The method I'm using is to use figure gaming point systems to give each formation a detailed points total. I'm using the old Corps Commander point system, which is very detailed and does go down to visualization systems contained in each vehicle. This could be totally wrong, but it gives us an idea of the technical strengths, or at least theoretical technical strengths. Aspects such as training and morale is not included in this analysis. That's simply too hard to determine and is far too subjective. My personal gut feeling is any initial PLA forces that land on Taiwan will have a high degree of training and be of high morale. If that morale is based on propaganda which does not reflect reality, I suspect that morale will quickly collapse. But for the critical first weeks, it should hold. On the other side, the ROC morale is also very high, as they're defending their homeland against an invader. I suspect that level of morale may reach a very high level indeed, which should even apply to the reservists. If Taipei falls, this may no longer be the case, but once again I suspect morale will be very high even after this occurs on the ROC side, as long as they feel that they have US support and there is some hope. As for looking at training, the PLA forces involved should have a very high level of training, specifically for the amphibious brigades. Reinforcements and replacements may not, but once again, for the first critical few weeks, I have to assume the PLA forces will have a high level of training. On the ROC side, the regular army will have a high level of training, but the reservists obviously will have less. As long as the reservists are mainly focused on defence, then this should not be an issue, but this does limit the ability of the ROCA to launch counterattacks. The final point that we need to look at is a doctrine, and I'm afraid that is a real wild card. I have no idea if the PLA doctrine will be inferior or superior to the ROCA doctrine. I have to leave this up to the viewers to decide, but I have no really firm opinion on this point, apart from one interesting idea. The PLA is using the whole combined arms concept, where battalions are a mix of tank and mechanized infantry. Now, the Russian attack on Ukraine, or the Russians, used a similar ideology, and they've gone back to a brigade structure where the battalions are pretty much just mech infantry and or tanks. So I'm wondering if perhaps this CA doctrine, or combined arms doctrine, may not be that good. But again, I have no real firm opinion on the point. As for the ROCA, they just follow basic American doctrine, and that's reasonably robust and works reasonably well. Let's now drill down into the point system. This shows an example of the point system, in this case a Type 86 US Armoured Division, which was deployed in Europe in 1989. The regiment or equivalent level of command is now listed or highlighted with the red lines. The number of each regiment is also indicated, as is its combat strength in terms of points. The final formation level shown is the battalion or equivalent. The number of each battalion is included, in this case 2 tank battalions. Moving to the right of this line, we come to the battalion's combat strength. In this case, the number is 2,201, followed by a battalion code and finally combat values, using a set of rules based on SPI Modern Battles board game, which we're not going to really discuss too much. This value will generally be ignored in the video as it is used for a set of figure gaming rules, but the other values will be used as they provide an idea of the battalion type and its combat strength. In front of the battalion name is a mobility symbol, which could be motorised, horse, cycle, armoured, and so on. Not that important for our purposes. For some of the battalions, an idea of the primary weapon within is provided. In this case, this is a battalion which consists of 155mm howitzers. Now let's drill down a little bit more in terms of the combat values or strengths. This is a points value of that formation using a rather old set of figure gaming rules, in this case Corps Commander. I could have used any set of rules, and while the results do vary a bit, I found they are all generally similar. Of course, how close these values reflect reality is another question that I can't answer. I'm not going to be really covering it in the video, and I just have to assume that it does bear some resemblance to reality. Now, let's drill down into the formation strengths of the ROCA, or Republic of China Army. The most powerful formation in the ROCA is the Mechanised Infantry Brigades. The points value is 7,292 points using existing standard equipment. If the ROC used the latest, most modern M60 main battle tank, which they never will, this could increase a bit, but it's not going to really be significant. However, if the ROCA used the M1 main battle tank, and they certainly will, they've already received some of them, the impact would be significant and would increase the combat value of the brigade by 1,250 points. This is more significant than it may seem, as with the M1 main battle tank, this mechanised brigade would end up having a combat strength closer to the PRC heavy and medium brigades, their most powerful formations. The brigade, or this brigade, consists of 3 infantry, 1 armoured battalion and 1 artillery battalion. Corps level assets would be attached, increasing the artillery, but let's first look at the brigade by itself. Close behind the mechanised brigade is the armoured brigade, which consists of 1 infantry, 3 armour and 1 artillery battalion. Just to note, the various brigades do vary a bit. The armoured brigade could have 1 to 2 infantry or 2 to 3 armoured, and the mechanised brigade also varies equivalently. But let's just look at the standard strengths. The impact of equipping this formation with the M1 main battle tank would be much more significant, increasing the combat strength by 1,600 points, making it more powerful than the mechanised brigades. These formations would have significant attack strength, which would be critical if the ROCA wanted to push the PLA forces back into the sea. The infantry brigades do not possess anywhere near as much combat strength, but in defence they would be very effective. In prepared position, their combat defensive strength would be increased by a factor of 2 or even 3, depending on the prepared positions. This formation would not be effective in attack, but very effective in defence. The reserved brigades are similar to these formations, but with older equipment and less training. One key point about these formations are the battalions consist of only a single troop type or equipment type. The battalions would be expected to work closely together, or different battalions, and using this structure there is an advantage and disadvantage with that ideology or doctrine. The advantage is flexibility. The brigade commander could tailor a task force to achieve a specific objective using what company level or sized formations made sense. This was something the Germans very effectively used up to 1941, or from 1941 up to the end of the war, and the Americans have been using extremely effectively since. The disadvantage in this doctrine is the level of training required to make it work is significant. Prior to 1941, the Germans failed to use low-level combined armed attacks, and often their tanks found themselves unsupported. The Germans solved this in their Panzer divisions in 1941 and some of the Panzer Grenadier divisions in 43 and 44, but it was not an easy or simple process. Many times tanks and infantry, which were not used to working together, would find themselves not supporting each other effectively, and this even occurred with the rebuilt Panzer divisions in September 1944. If the ROCA ensures all their troops are well trained to work together, then they would achieve doctrinally the most effective brigade structure and its and efficiency. I have to assume this will be the case. Let's now flip to the PLA forces. The Heavy Combined Arms Brigade is a very powerful formation at 11,616 points. The main combat component are the 4 Heavy Combined Armed Battalions, which are very powerful all-arms formations. The support elements are reasonable as well, making this a formidable brigade in terms of combat strength. The Amphibious Combined Arms Brigade requires a bit of guesswork at my end, as I do not possess good TO&E info on it. If this formation is structured in the same manner as the Heavy Combined Arms Brigades, except all equipment is amphibious, it's also a rather powerful brigade. The amphibious equipment is not as effective as non-amphibious vehicles, so the strength is less, but it is nonetheless a very powerful brigade. I must point out this brigade may actually be a lot smaller, as the PRC lacks sufficient amphibious transport capacity to transport so much heavy weapons. The medium-sized combined arms brigade is the closest to what in the West we would call an armoured brigade in the PLA. Because this formation possesses a significant amount of main battle tanks, its combat strength is significant. I estimate this is the most powerful brigade in the PLA army groups, particularly for attack. Once we move to the light combined arms brigades, the combat strength is significantly less, although still respectful. These formations would be easy to transport by sea and would possess good mobility over poor terrain, which makes them an important element in any invasion. These are basically motorised infantry brigades. Let's now look at doctrine, as this could have a significant impact on the actual effectiveness of these PLA formations. The Combined Arms Brigade concept is not new, being used by the Soviets when they first formed their initial tank brigades. What is new here is the combined arms element is brought down to the battalion, with each battalion containing 2 tank and 2 infantry companies, or mechanised infantry companies. The tank component in the combined arms battalion uses the same structure as those in the old Soviet motor rifle regiment, with the tank companies and the medium combined armed brigades organised in the same manner as those in the Soviet tank regiment. I suspect the company structure has its roots in the old Soviet-style structure that the PLA adopted prior to the 1990s. The real key difference is the mixing of tank and infantry companies in a single battalion. The US tried something along these lines in the old pentomic divisional structure, which some European NATO company or nations copied. I'm uncertain how successful this was, but the principle has some merit or significant advantages. Getting battalion-sized formations to conduct themselves in a true combined arms manner is hard, mainly because different troop types rarely train together. It takes a significant amount of effort to ensure different troop types train on a regular basis in a mixed troop type manner. Creating a battalion which has a mix of tanks and infantry makes it a lot easier to ensure these troop types train together and can work together in an effective manner, so that's definitely a plus. There is, however, a disadvantage, which is flexibility. The ability to mix and match battalions and companies to achieve a specific objective gives a commander the greatest level of flexibility. This structure does not encourage that, and once the armour has been degraded, the formation becomes a pure infantry formation. The basic trade-off is training versus optimisation of your force mix even after casualties. As any war will probably be decided in the first few weeks, this disadvantage may not be serious, but it does represent a significant difference between the PLA and ROCA. We noticed with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Russia used the same ideology, that very quickly the battalions, or combined arms battalions, degraded to the point where they were not effective. But initially they were still effective. So it really does depend how long this conflict is going to go on for. The final reasonably important point is the PLA brigades will likely suffer casualties on the way in. If an amphibious vessel is hit with an SSM, it's likely the heavy equipment will be lost, but the troops and equipment, or some equipment, will get to the shore. If this should occur, the combined arms nature of the battalion may be degraded to the point where they would only be useful for defence. Let's compare some of the formations using values from an SPI board game. I use a figure game conversion of the SPI board game on a regular basis, and these are the values I use for my simulation of this military action. This shows an ROCA mechanised brigade. It has a HQ battalion, 3 mech infantry battalions, a tank battalion, and an artillery battalion. Just a quick note, the mech brigades sometimes are organised, or one of them was organised with an additional tank and 1 less mech infantry, but this is the standard structure. The first value shown on each of these green squares is the attack value. In this particular case, the attack value is 6. The next value shown here is the defence value. The artillery has no conventional attack capability, so the 1 that you see with the artillery is its defence strength. The last value shown is the movement allowance, so with the tank or the MBT it's 12, and with the SPH it's 9. The indirect fire elements do have special values, the first one being bombardment or attack indirect fire strength, which in this case is 4. The next value shown is its FPF, or final or fire protection factor, or indirect defensive combat strength. In this case, its value is 3. The last is range, which depends on the ground scale, and I'm not going to delve too quickly into the range of these weapon systems in this video, as it's more of a gamey thing. The next row shown here is the ROCA Armoured Brigade. As you can see, it has more tank and less mech infantry battalions than the mech infantry brigade. Just a quick note, some of these formations only have 2 main battle tank and 2 mechanised infantry, but this is probably the closest to a standard structure for the tank brigade. The next line that you see here is a PLA Heavy Combined Arms Brigade. You'll see this is a much larger formation with almost 50% more combat strength than anything the ROCA possesses. The next line shown is the Amphibious Brigade, and it also contains significantly more combat strength than an ROCA brigade, although this is much less than a 50% advantage. Quick note, this assumes it uses a similar structure to the Heavy Combined Arms Brigade, and it may not. The last line you see here is the Medium-Sized Combined Arms Brigade, and this is even more powerful, and I would imagine this would be the primary armoured offensive formation in any future war. Of course, this assumes you can actually ship it over the water onto Taiwan, but this would certainly be an effective formation in a traditional ground war. This situation does not look good for the ROC. However, the ROCA does have significant advantages, which is its SSMs. SSMs, or surface-to-surface missiles, will inflict casualties on anything coming inbound. If the PLA brigades suffer 10 to 20% casualties on the way in, their final strength will be much closer to that of the ROCA brigades. In terms of combat effectiveness, it could even be more effective, as losses will be asymmetrical, so all the artillery could be lost, which would have a significant impact on the brigade's ability to attack. The final point noted is once the ROCA receives its full complement of M1 main battle tanks, and about half have already arrived, the combat capability of their brigades that are armed with this tank will be significantly boosted, especially in terms of launching counterattacks. The 50% advantage the PLA possesses would be reduced down to an insignificant advantage, plus factoring in losses on the way in would put the PLA brigades at a disadvantage in this case. After drilling down and looking at the force mixes in great detail, we begin to see some patterns which assist us in explaining the tactics each side are deploying. A major focus for the ROCA, or ROC, is the acquisition of F-16 fighters, which would threaten the PRC complete's dominance of the air. The F-16 could also be used to launch SSMs, or air-launched surface missiles anyway, and even the new modified iron bombs, which allow for some guidance, would have a significant impact. While the ROC would take heavy losses in the air, especially long-range attacks using F-16s, with air-to-surface missiles, it could cost prohibitive losses among the PRC's amphibious assets. The PRC could also use land-based SSMs to target ROC missile sites, but this would require a surprise attack, and while it would degrade the ROC SSM's capability, it would not eliminate it. Air-launched SSMs, or actually air-to-surface missiles have the advantage of being able to be deployed far away from any threat area, and they would fly into range to launch, so these probably would not be degraded. The first week of any conflict would be a very high-tech conflict indeed, involving a significant number of high-cost missile systems being used, and probably expended in a very short period of time. And so we come to an end of episode 33 of my organisational video series, in this case comparing the combat strengths of the PLA and ROCA brigades. I just hope against hope that we avoid any form of military conflict, as in the long run both the people of the PRC and Taiwan will suffer the most if it should occur. Alle guten Ding, kommen zu einem Ende.